right, guys, welcome back. Episode 2 of Skepdicks. We're continuing on our conversation about Atlantis. And you'll have to forgive me. I was like horribly sick yesterday, so I'll probably be coughing and mouth breathing and all that on this recording. So we're going to have.
Out of the ordinary.
Yeah. So where did we leave off? Do you guys remember?
No.
Cool.
I think we kind of like updated where we were on everything, just like saying, yeah, it feels feasible.
Yeah.
I mean, which it does. I mean, of all the far-fetched ideas that we could talk about, I think this one's pretty tame, pretty believable. But you did say you were going to get into the more like obscure like things about it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
let's pick up where you left off and
Okay.
So I did have a question before you get into that part,
Cool.
but it may be a lead into that part.
Great.
Because I understand that Atlantis is supposed to have fallen into the sea. And last time we talked about that, and we talked about that being where the plateau is and that, right? And so I draw the connection there with like people of the sea, but why is there such a strong connection between like mermaids and Atlantis? Or is that just me? Because it feels like that's pretty, like if you Google Atlantis, a picture of a mermaid will definitely pop up.
Yeah.
They're always adorned. Any casino or that talks about Atlantis, like
Right.
mermaids inevitably pop up there.
Yeah.
Is it just because it's a city that's supposed to have fallen to the bottom of the ocean and they just made it easy like that? Or what's that connection?
Yeah, so that actually is a really good lead in. So there was like a revived interest in the story of Atlantis starting like around 1900 because of people who, like one or two people published some like insanely popular books that got people.
Ignatius Donnelly. Atlantis,
Yes.
Antedendum World.
Yeah, that guy's name sounds familiar. I don't remember exactly what the
You don't forget Ignatius.
I don't remember exactly what the content of his book was, but I think he might have been one of the guys who no. Sorry, what's up?
I got a jet.
Okay.
Just I'll put me on hold.
Yeah. Tom's going to be in and out of this recording. He's dealing with a sick child, unfortunately. So we're just going to continue. Yeah, I don't remember if he was one of the people who was like, oh, story about Atlantis, this might have been real, like just revisiting Plato's account, or if he was one of the people who inserted like wacky stuff in there. I don't remember, but he's responsible for like reviving interest. He moved forward into, like the 30s, 40s, people got really into clairvoyance and like medium, like psychic type stuff. And you have a lot of people like adding to the Atlantis narrative, saying that they're like remote viewing through time and adding details to the story. Into the 60s, you get just a whole movement, probably directly correlated with like the availability of psychotropic substances. You get a lot of, I can't think of any inoffensive words, but a lot of just really
Offensive ones.
What's that?
What are some of the offensive?
I was just thinking like hippy dippy, crystal loving, like you get a lot of that new agey kind of stuff, which I'm not going to say that none of that stuff has merit. I'm just going to say that most of it doesn't, and most of the people who embrace it are just a little whacked. But there is good stuff within there. It's just that, I think the version of it that most people cling on to is just a silly version. So during that time period, that kind of stuff is popular. So people are seeking, spiritual connection to things and enlightenment and whatnot. And Atlantis becomes like really popular again in like the 60s and 70s. And I'm sure there are all kinds of factors that I'm not taking into account or remembering. But the point is, in the 20th century, Atlantis went from being an account of something that was either historical, pseudo-historical, or fictional. It went from that to being like representative of magic in the world and spiritual enlightenment. And so you have people making all these connections to just like ideal spirituality and stuff, and connecting it to Atlantis. And part of that is mediums who claimed to see through time into Atlantis's history. A lot of them added things about their technology and their society and whatnot that are a little far-fetched, including like flying machines, laser weapons, like really high technology. And also they all practiced like psychic powers, and they, basically they just like lived on a different plane than us. This is kind of the picture that got painted by mediums who were really into it. And
so that's where that kind of advanced technology, because I know that they talked about it being an advanced society, right?
mm-hmm.
But nothing about lasers or anything
Right.
like that.
Right.
So that all came from mediums and...
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Now, because that became the picture of Atlantis, that they were spiritually enlightened, high technology, just on a different plane, the idea of them sinking into the ocean kind of like, I don't know, people just clung to the magical aspect of it and started painting this picture of an Atlantis under the sea that, still goes on or whatever. And it's all just hokey silliness. There's no reason whatsoever to connect mermaids to Atlantis or to insist upon some image of it as like an underwater society that goes on. That's all just silliness, but it's fun fiction. I'll admit that. So it kind of gets perpetuated through that.
Out here, where do you land on mermaids?
That's an interesting one. Mostly skeptical, with a little bit of like there are some things about it that I could believe, but yeah.
Okay.
Do you remember hearing about I think it was like Christopher Columbus and the was it not walruses, right? Or
people say manatees. Yeah.
manatees. Yeah.
That's why I was smirking. I was like, where do we land on getting drunk enough to get with a manatee?
What
a funny theory.
If we can, depart for 1 second. I think that's so stupid. I think people's willingness to write off stuff with like the crappiest of explanations is so silly. People back then knew what manatees were. No one's going to see a fat ass manatee with this big, like giant cow face and think like, oh, that's a half human, half fish. Like that didn't happen. People didn't mistake manatees for mermaids. That's just silliness.
Yeah,
Anyway.
Like manatees are in Wisconsin, and you're like, yeah, this joke in Wisconsin.
when you're months at sea and you haven't seen a woman in half a year.
That's true. There's a like being out at sea can kind of make you go crazy.
Or just keeps going down the longer you're out.
Yep. So does that answer your question about the mermaidness about Atlantis?
Yeah,
Sort of.
I mean, that kind of lined up with what I thought.
Yeah.
They were just a city at the bottom of the ocean and people who live in water. Let's throw those two together.
Yeah, it just evolved.
I saw a video recently of it was like one of those mermaid bars, that they have where they actually like they pay women to swim around.
Oh sure, yeah.
I saw a video recently of one. These people were filming her, and she like was like heading to the surface, and you see her just like fart. You just see the air. You just see the air come out of her butt, and it just like ruins like I mean, like the like the magic for like kids, or I don't know if it was a bar or just a place, but catching that on video is just so funny.
That's awesome.
I mean, kids got to learn, mermaids fart, mermaids are people too.
Yeah.
Love it.
I saw one where she just kicked off her fins and everyone's like, what? Like,
I saw that too.
Kick that off completely. And then you go back and you watch, because I obviously read the comments, and it was, you could see it, like it got caught on some coral, and that's why like it freaked her out, like, oh, yikes. I'm gonna get stuck here. So she immediately got out of there. And
yeah,
was like, oh,
good for her. That's scary.
initial watch, you're just like, oh yeah,
Quit. Yeah, so we'll just let everyone know that I'll be popping in and out because Alora is sick.
Yeah, we mentioned that. Yep.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and we'll just drive on through any moments that you hop out or whatever, and we'll try to catch you up. Yep.
Yeah, the one thing she's not sick of though is hearing about Atlantis. So
Cool. Let's. Any other things questions we want to put out there, or?
yeah, I have to release a statement. So, The Little Mermaid takes place in Atlantica. It is not Atlantis, so we have to discount at least 4 hours of research from the record.
Cool.
I was misinformed, misaligned. I didn't know what I was saying. I apologize to the Atlantis community. I'm so sorry. It'll never happen again.
It's very good of you to get out in front of it like that. Smart.
Yeah.
Thanks,
the other
Tom.
children's movies I watch will be related, in fact, to the topic at hand.
Good. Glad to know it. All right. Moving on. We talked about Reshot and how structurally it looks like the Atlantis capital city. Talked about the Azores and how they match the geographical information given by Plato. And they also match some of the, maybe you would still call this geographical, I guess, but like just in terms of the description of like the shape of the continent itself and stuff like that. So there are promising things about both of those locations. Again, we also talked about how I don't think you have to stick yourself to one or the other, because we're probably talking about a civilization that lasted for a long time and was very powerful and was probably kind of all over the known world.
So that actually sparked a question.
Cool.
For me, is why? So if they were all over, right? They were like one of 10 kingdoms, or and that one is the one that sank, but supposedly they are like an advanced civilization. Have we just not been able to connect the dots back to it? Is that why is Plato's writing the only thing that we have from that? I understand that it's like way long ago, right? But like I said, it was like 9,000 years before, or 9,300 years before him, which he was 2,300 years ago. So it's like, I get it's an extremely long time, but we also have Plato's writings. Why wasn't someone else talking about it?
I think it really is just like pure lucky happenstance that we have anything at all, because by all rights we should know nothing about what happened before the Younger Dryas climate event. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, which is where people theorize that the climate event was caused by a series of asteroidal impacts. That is still by a lot of people considered kind of fringe, but the notion that there was climatic upheaval during the Younger Dryas, that's not in question. That's a fact. So if there was cataclysm associated with those climatic changes, then it stands to reason that we would have nothing to go on from what was in the world before then. We're starting to uncover things from around that time, like 25 years ago or whatever. Göbekli Tepe, it might have been before that. I don't remember, but Göbekli Tepe has in recent years become like very popular, but the site has been known and has been dated for like a long time. But that's from around 11,000 years ago. You have a few.
Göbekli Tepe is another advanced civilization that's supposed to have been underwater, right? But that one's like closer to a coast.
No.
Am I thinking of that right?
No, I don't believe they were very close to the coast at all. I think so. It's in Anatolia in Turkey. I think they're pretty far inland where they're at that site. I think. I don't know.
I must have them convinced or confused. Yeah, you're right. This looks like the middle of a desert. So
okay,
you're right.
Yeah, but the point is, it was whatever society was responsible for creating the site was capable of much greater architectural feats than we would typically give people of that era credit for. So it's just one of those things that kind of stands out, you know, and it's like, ooh, I guess we don't know a lot about the people back then and the shape of the world back then. More and more things come out over time that help us fill in that picture. But from before that time, before the Younger Dryas event, it's pretty impossible to penetrate, to see through. So the notion that from whatever happened, a scant record was passed down through oral tradition and then recorded by Egyptian priests and then preserved in their like record halls, and then by chance a Greek visitor who was a statesman, and I think he was also like a historian, on a visit to Egypt, he was, this information was shared with him from what was even then an ancient record. And he presumably accepted it as true and came back and either wrote about it or shared it or whatever, so that by 300 years later, it was still in the Greek awareness enough for Plato or Timaeus and Critias to have access to this story and to reiterate it. The fact that it survived by those mechanisms all that time is like a near impossibility. So I think the fact that we have anything at all is surprising. And that's why I think like it's the only thing we have.
Yeah, and that part's hard to understand as well, because the conversation that's supposed to have happened between that guy and the Egyptians, we're closer to that than the distance or the time between that conversation happening and when Atlantis was supposed to have sunk, right? Like
Totally.
9600 BC, that would be twice as long as the time difference between now and when that conversation happened.
For sure. So, yeah, 3 times.
Yeah. So that's also what's kind of mystifying about it, is how did that Egyptian that told him that know that?
Yeah.
Right. Unless there was something written down and preserved, like you said, and if it was able to be preserved 3 times as long as the distance between now and then, why isn't that record still there?
Yeah. Yeah, that is a good question, and a couple of things have to be the case for any of that to be true, one of which is the Egyptian civilization, like as like the continuum has to start earlier than we think. Like there has to have been a continuous Egyptian culture and civilization that led right into the Old Kingdom, which is like, we currently consider that like the beginning of ancient Egypt as we know it, like dynastic Egypt. The Old Kingdom, when these disparate groups and whatnot were like unified, their somewhat unified culture has to be older than that for a record to have been kept that long. Or at the very least, the people who were responsible for keeping that record, whatever group they belonged to, had to have maintained some sort of high enough status in the unified culture that their records were preserved and considered true history. So like all of those things have to be true for there to be any possible validity to this having been a record that was preserved that long. So it's a stretch, and it's weird for sure.
Isn't that something that's under debate, of like how old the Sphinx is?
Totally. That's one of my favorite things about Egyptology right now. It's so cool. Do we want to talk about that a bit, or
maybe we could save that for another thing?
Okay.
Land on mummies.
Yeah.
We'll bring in Brendan Fraser as a guest. But
totally.
Fraser.
It is. It's Fraser. Isn't that weird?
If you don't know what I just did, that was when he clapped at that award show and he forgot how to clap. But
I don't think I've seen that.
I'm so glad that,
I mean,
side note, I'm so glad that he's made a comeback. He was like, I mean, for us, since we're all kind of came around the same, he was like in everything there for a while.
Totally.
Mummy, it was George at the Jungle. Like, I love that guy.
Yeah.
Looney Tunes movie.
Which movie?
Yeah, he was awesome.
Looney Tunes Back in Action. Like it was like a bunch of different like franchises that he was in.
Yeah, all
Yeah.
it.
It's getting very realistic that there may be like another Mummy movie with him.
Really?
Yeah, I've heard like that there's like chatter about it.
That's crazy.
Yeah, which would be amazing. I mean,
It really would be.
I think he's like, I mean, you just have to get in like fairly decent shape again and
Sure. Yep.
do it.
Which he can do. He's done that before. He's like gotten way out of shape and gotten a little bit back in shape before.
Yeah. That George of the Jungle, like when he was so freaking ripped for that movie. It's insane to look back at, like to see him now and then look back at that movie.
Yeah. I think I was listening to him. It might have been in an Actors on Actors interview or something, but in some interview he was talking about, oh no, I think it was where I don't know if it's GQ or whatever. They have someone sit down and review their like most famous movies. He was talking about that, and he talks about being miserable for like how he had to keep his fat content real low, and you know, like driving home from set, he'd like pass by a McDonald's and just desperately want to go to the McDonald's drive-thru. He just hated it apparently.
That movie is what sparked my like lifelong crush on Leslie Mann too.
Oh yeah, she's great.
You-
She was great in that.
And
You dated a
40-year-old
lot of-
virgin, and I was like, that's her. And then now, you know, she's married to Judd Apatow, right?
Is she really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's hilarious.
That's why she's in like a ton of those movies, and the
Okay.
kids were in all those movies. Those are actually her daughters, and yeah. So that's
Wow,
funny.
that's cool.
Yeah, I was gonna say you've definitely dated some Leslie Mann like types before.
You really seek it out.
Like I mean, when you pointed it out, it clicked into place.
Yeah, yeah. She's always been like top of the list for sure. Who are your guys' top of the list? Since we're just way off course, we'll get back to Atlantis.
For the largest chunk of my life, it was like Zoe Deschanel, but she's, I mean, I say she's getting older, but so am I. It's probably changed now, I think. It's great podcasting.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
I'm just chewing on my Huel over here. I don't know, man. For most of my young life, Jennifer Garner was top of the list, and she's still very high up there. I love her. She's like one of the few celebrities I follow on Instagram because she's just like so wholesome. She's like Hugh Jackman, you know. Anyway,
How's she like
I
you?
think I still love her. Just wholesome, just cool.
Oh,
Like, you know, they're a good person and they're fun to follow on social media.
yeah.
Alexandria Daddario, or Daddario, however you say it. That's like probably she's taking the place of Zoe Deschanel.
Well, jumping back into it though,
Good idea.
Egypt is fascinating to me, and like debating on how old the Sphinx is, because we have these older advanced civilizations, and it's like, oh, we want to know all about Atlantis, but then there's like Egypt, right?
Totally.
Exactly what that is, which is like an advanced civilization that's been there. So
Absolutely. And we certainly don't know enough about it. Like we have, each of us has this image in our mind of ancient Egypt that is painted by public education. And it's not a very filled in picture. And some of the stuff that we think we have filled in, I'm convinced we're wrong about anyway. But yeah, we don't know enough about them at all. But to your point, if the Sphinx is, potentially like much, much older than the Giza pyramids, then there was a civilization that inhabited that place that was capable of huge feats many more thousands of years ago than what we currently think. And if so, who knows? Maybe they're the same exact culture that preserved this account and records that then kind of got subsumed into unified Egyptian records in the Old Kingdom period, and maybe that's why we have an account of it.
yeah. Man, the worst part about this is that we'll never know.
I'm not convinced we'll never know.
Like, we might know that this, like, that they could find something to prove this is in fact true.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
that's what's fun about talking about like aliens, is in our lifetime we'll get to see what that was and what
right.
But that, like, they're
Hopefully.
yeah, like there's the potential for it to be realized in our lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't go back in time to be like, what? That's how they got those blocks there. That's how they did it, and see it in action, which is.
I'm gonna out myself a little bit here. I'm not convinced that we'll never be able to see it, because I think that things like remote viewing, including viewing through time, I think those are legit. So maybe someday.
So you.
But we're going to travel faster than light away from us, get to a point to then look at us?
Probably not like that. No.
How does that work?
How does remote viewing and time viewing work?
Yeah.
I don't know how it works.
Where does
it doesn't work.
Where does what?
Where does your like concept? I've never
heard that.
So how does
really? Okay. My notion of it comes from well, if I'm being honest, I'm naturally just like a believer. Things that are interesting to me and that are like these wild, fantastic possibilities, I'm inclined to wonder about how they can be true before I'm inclined to wonder about or determined to declare them false. So in wondering about how things like that can be true, I've just come across a lot of things like not first, like secondhand instances where I have not observed the person during their remote viewing session, but heard. Session? Okay, let's just real briefly treat that.
You mean like a vision?
Yeah, clairvoyance. You're seeing a place or a time that is not where you're currently at. Your brain is going there. Like your consciousness is going there and observing. So that's what remote viewing is.
Gotcha.
Was this the guy that you said saw Mars?
Oh, have I told you about this? Yeah. So having kind of analyzed the results of his remote viewing session and having compared it to like some other things, I was convinced that there's like a pretty high possibility that he was tapping into something legit. Outside of that, the biggest like convincing source I have for it is, I think they called it Project Stargate. It's where the CIA and military intelligence embarked on this endeavor to find and train people who had like a proclivity for being able to see things outside of their own time and place and like use it.
They look at goats.
Yeah, it's the story of that.
Is that George Clooney?
Yeah. But the fact is that the government took it seriously enough to dump a bunch of black money into it for a long time, and according to people like David Morehouse, it's still going on. But basically, it was an intelligence gathering apparatus, and like any other, it wasn't given 100% credibility or anything like that. But there was like a percentage of reliability that you could use it for. Like people would get stuff wrong in remote viewing, but they would get a lot right, and so they kind of learned how to utilize it like that. Anyway, I think it's legit.
Interesting.
Okay, I've got so many.
Yeah, that's a whole other episode.
Get into our whole other thing. How convenient for this guy to talk about Mars. Well, I mean, what, the one other planet that everyone's talking about all the time? Why wasn't it like, hey man, I can't pronounce this word on this planet that I was on, but I was remote viewing that before. Not I was watching Elon talk about Mars yesterday and then fell asleep to it.
Well, no, it wasn't like he just happened to end up at Mars. He was trying to remote view Mars and understand something from Mars. That's like what he was attempting to do. He was seeking it out.
What do you understand?
That's something we have to go into in a dedicated episode about remote viewing, because I have like two points that are that
Yeah,
I
let's
want to
make it
hit.
2 points. I think that'd be the best use of our time because
Okay.
we're gonna obviously be arguing about the weirdos you hang out with. Plenty
For
of
sure.
time.
For sure.
The other weirdos.
Yes. Okay, so getting right into it. Atlantis is supposedly a civilization from before the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe, and that puts them at before 12,000 years ago. In the movie Atlantis, it's funny, they make the Atlantean people, they make them Proto-Indo-Europeans, and like, because, you know, they spoke the Proto-Indo-European language, they can speak all of the languages that evolved from it. So like someone's like speaking in French, and then the Atlantean woman can like understand her, and I think even she understands Milo in English, and it's just like, okay, that's silly for a lot of reasons. But the silliest thing about it is them choosing the Proto-Indo-European culture and language, because I think that didn't even exist until like 5,000-6,000 years ago. So like all the Indo-European languages, they were all one language going back like 5,000 years ago. And it only lasted that way for a short time, like maybe 2,000 years or something like that. And then it broke up into the various other languages. Now, a language family that inhabits the right area of the world and whose predecessor language dates to the correct time is the Proto-Afroasiatic language, which is the unified version, the predecessor of all of the Afroasiatic family languages that exist today. They're kind of all over Northern Africa and the Middle East. And anyway, that's where the language family is kind of spread throughout today. But the Proto-Afroasiatic language existed from like 18,000 years ago to 12,000 years ago. 12,000 years ago is about when it split up. So if I'm like looking for a group that we already know of to say that like these are the people, the remnants of whatever probably globe spanning, or not globe spanning, but like known world spanning culture existed back then, I'm looking at the Afroasiatic language family.
Okay, these numbers line up. Fact
Cool.
checking you.
Cool. Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, this all.
So that's just like a theory that I enjoy about like who we might be talking about here. I'm sure other people have come to that same conclusion, but that's my.
It doesn't sound wacky at all. I thought you promised us some wacky stuff.
So that's just my theory of like placing it, because I didn't want to do this without getting there. I do have a wacky thing that I'm going to introduce. So we were talking about mediums earlier, right? I've divulged that I buy into the idea of remote viewing and things like that. Discerning things without any like obvious way of knowing them. I think that kind of stuff can be real. I think more often it's there's a show going on and people are pretending to do that, but I think there is a real ability to do that exists. One of the people that I think was legit and who had like a pretty good percentage of being right about things is a guy named Edgar Cayce. Have you guys heard of him?
No.
I think he was around in the 30s. Or I think that was when he was like popular though. He was they called him the sleeping prophet because he would hypnotize himself into sleep and give readings to people who had specific questions. He did a lot of readings about like personal health and medicine. Did a lot of readings about spirituality and past lives and the hereafter, and he got into all the kind of spiritual natured stuff later in his like public career as a medium. And one of his topics of interest and that a lot of people had a lot to ask him about was Atlantis. So he is one of the people that fits into that category of kooks who contributed all kinds of weird stuff to the story that I was just decrying earlier. But he's one that I think had some interesting stuff to say. Now, again, he said a lot of things about Atlantis, and probably a good number of them are not true. But I think, given his record, there are probably a number of them that are true. Now, on a kind of an overview, some of the things he said was that Atlantis, part of their downfall was basically there were like race wars. There were like two different like races of people, and over time they ceased to get along, and their clashes became big enough that like their governmental structure was toppled, and eventually what did them in was like the misuse of some like energy weapon they had. He also talks about them having had basically like balloon vehicles, like inflating skins with like basically hot air ballooning it, and being able to like fly around. That's where you get some of the stories of like things like, oh, flying cars and lasers and stuff like that. He contributed to some of that. He had some things to say. So I see your wheels turn in. Before I continue along my line of thought, you have anything you want to?
I had no idea about Edgar. This guy is talking about a lot of different things. He's the father of holistic medicine. He's got a diet and recipe guide. He's got some theories on the story of Jesus as well.
Nice. I don't think I've even looked into that.
The power of your mind. He talked about a lot of different things.
Yeah.
The whole time when you were talking about two different races, I couldn't help but think of like mermaids and manatees. And then you said like inflating their skin, and I was like, that's where manatees come. That their whole thing of inflation and getting bigger.
Sorry, I didn't make that clear. I meant like skins sewed together as a balloon, like hides, you know.
Yeah.
Inflating their skin.
I just pictured flying. like a Rick and Morty thing where they show up and then, you know, how they always just make like anything be like a normal race of people, but you know, robots or
yeah.
And these are just the manatees versus the mermaids.
Yep. Okay, so this guy, right, says a lot of crazy things about Atlantis, not all of which do I think are false. And he was the guy who you might have heard of the Bimini Road or the Bimini Wall. He had made some sort of prediction that I think in 1939, like the western edge of Atlantis will rise up out of the ocean in the Bahamas or something like that. He says something to that effect. And then this weird, possibly natural, possibly constructed seafloor structure called the Bimini Road was found off the island of Bimini in 1939. I think he said like between 37 and 39 or something like that. Anyway, so people like to connect that to his prophecy and be like, oh, this must be a remnant structure from Atlantis. Who knows? It might. It's weird, but it's like, I don't know if we have any reason to connect it to prehistory in that way. But another prediction he made was that in 1959, American scientists would rediscover the weapon that was responsible for destroying Atlantis. Now, this is not something people talk about. This is a conclusion I've come to on my own. But guess what was essentially discovered or
Okay. I got to take a break again.
Okay, cool. What was published about in 1959?
1959?
Yeah.
Not the A-bomb, because that was earlier.
Yep.
Don't know.
Lasers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so this guy says American scientists are going to rediscover the weapon that destroyed Atlantis in 1959. And he has talked, I think, about them using crystals to generate lasers or so. I think he's talked about stuff like that as well. But anyway, in 1959, Gordon Gould, who's an American scientist, there was already something that existed called the maser, which was to microwaves what the laser is to visible light. It's basically an amplified version of that wave.
Oh, you almost had me. 1960, Cole.
No. So probably one was constructed in 1960. But in 1959, Gordon Gould published the principles outlining how to move this concept for the maser into the visible light spectrum and create a laser. So the principles for the laser were discovered or whatever. They were outlined and published in 1959. So I think you could say that was when the laser was discovered. Is like when it was
laser is an acronym
for light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation.
Yes. I actually knew that before looking this up.
Nice.
Here, and I always think I'm way smarter for knowing that.
It's a good one. Like, it shouldn't be an acronym,
one of the
you know?
few that I can remember.
Yeah. That's cool.
You know?
It seems like it would be, instead it would be something that lazes, you know? Like, it doesn't seem like it would be an acronym.
Like we name everything else.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so anyway, that's my kooky thing is like, I think Edgar Cayce's legit. I think, who knows, maybe he predicted something legit with the Bimini Road.
Kooky that he said that you're like, whoa, that's a lot.
I don't remember off the top of my head because I tend to like brush right past that stuff and like latch onto the stuff that I find interesting. But like, for sure, there are things that he has said that I'm like, no, I definitely think he got that wrong, you know? Because you're not going to get everything right. The same way you're not going to, I don't know. This like remote viewing thing is like a tool, but like you're relying on a human to interpret it, and humans suck at interpreting things that they see, hear, and feel, and so.
Somebody made a whole video on the wild predictions of Edgar Cayce.
Nice.
I can't believe I haven't ever heard of him. I love like I don't know if you'd throw him in the same category of like Nostradamus or
sure, yeah,
like,
totally.
You know, I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's fun. And it's fun to think about them as not just like, you know, weirdos who were misunderstood in their time and so their legend persisted, but like people who might have potentially been onto something. It's fun to entertain that possibility. And I think that there's sometimes something there.
Yeah. It is interesting that he clearly said that it was that we would rediscover the thing that took down Atlantis, but
yeah.
But is he also the one that said that a weapon took down Atlantis?
I think so. I think he said that they were taken down by like the misuse or the malfunction or whatever of like their, you know what? I think it was, I can't remember if it was a weapon by nature or if it was just like an energy source that was like weaponized either accidentally or intentionally. I don't remember exactly how that goes, but I could probably find some specifics on that and either relay them or like link them in the comments of our video or something.
Yeah, that would be fun to talk about.
Yeah.
All right, I gotta bounce.
Thanks for doing this. And hey, Tom's back just in time for the outro. Thanks for taking care of your kid, Tom. Thank you guys for being here for this. How's Alora doing, by the way?
She's good. She's just dry heaving.
Poor girl.
She's officially sick and tired of Atlantis.
How come we call it dry heaving, but when we throw up, we call it throw up instead of wet heaving?
Wet heaving.
Wet heaving.
I feel pretty shitty. I might wet heave. There was 2 people in one stall. Wet heaving. All right, I gotta go, guys.
Okay, cool. Once again,
Yeah.
thank you guys. Thank you to everyone who has listened. Also, I think probably we'll do a distinct Atlantis episode some other time, like not on our next one, but like going into the weird kooky stuff if there's anything further we want to explore there. Anyway, thank you guys.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
All right. See you later.